School Board of Education is now called to order. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Watson, please guide us to the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Okay, I will turn it over to you, Superintendent Wandering.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes. So our esteemed principal, Mr. Stevens, has fallen ill this evening. In his stead are three highly capable stand-ins, but they were also originally part of the presentation as well. So we're going to miss out on the fantastic introduction he did provide. I believe Principal Mr. Cross is going to fill in. So welcome, Mr. Cross from Home Warner, here to present. I'm going to pull your presentation here. You can control it. We've got lots of presentations today. There we go.
Tenants for Wyatt later for falling ill.
The floor is yours.
It's two very capable replacements for sure. The third one's debatable.
Well, we'll be the judge of that,
Great, thanks for having us tonight. We appreciate it. Tonight we're going to be presenting on the processes, procedures, and strategies that we utilize in our learning coaching program here at Home Warner. As you'll see, this is speaking directly to Board Goal 3, Benchmark 31C, which again speaks directly to the learning coaching process. As you see through our process that we use, a number of the slides that we're going to look at tonight, the strategies we use are going to reflect a number of board goals, not just Board Goal 3. Also reflect on our building goals and how we tie those in as well. And it is nice how our board goals are aligned. It allows us to hit a number of goals in just one process that we have, rather than trying to have a simple process for each one. So you might ask yourself, what do high-level athletes, singers, artists, CEOs, educators, and successful people in general have in common? It is high-level coaches who support them enhancing their own skills, building their own expertise, and nurturing their great performances. We are blessed to have two great learning coaches at our building, Mrs. Lisa Pacet and Mrs. Andrea Payne, who are going to get started here on our presentation.
Yes.
Pretty good so far, Rich.
He's the late man, that's what
Put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen.
Good segue. Yeah, there we go. So we're really happy to be here today because we're going to talk about something that we love, and that's actually many things we love, and that's the amazing work our teachers do, but also our job in supporting them. So I'm going to start off with just what a learning coach is, and I think most of you probably kind of know, but when people ask me, like, what do you do? Are you a teacher? And I go, not anymore, I'm a learning coach. And they're like, what is that? So I think a learning coach is really a partner with teachers, and our ultimate goal is to just improve student achievement. And we do that by working side by side with them, collecting data, trying out practices, looking at data again, and really refining their skills. And they're like, oh, so like you're a super teacher, you're like the teacher of teachers. And no, that's not it. So we're not a super teacher. It's like we've been doing this a while. We have skills and expertise too, but so do the teachers. So I really like this picture because you've got Michael Jordan up there, and he is an incredible player. And clearly his coach, maybe, many years ago, he's also a good player, but he's not a better player than Michael Jordan. But his role is really important, and Michael Jordan always needs a coach. He's never such a good player that his coach just goes away. So we're always there, mirroring, helping the teachers, working side by side, cheering them on, bringing them data, bringing new ideas, and that's kind of our goal. So why is it important? Ultimately, it's important because we're always looking at student achievement and always hoping that more students, ensuring that students achieve more. The other part is we're really smarter together. Being a teacher can be very isolating. You just might be you with 25, 30 students in a room, and you're the only adult, and you might not have anyone to talk to, but when you work with the coach, you do. So we can be in there while they're teaching, and they're maybe missing some things, they're not seeing some things. We can be the other set of eyes that looks at what the students are doing, collects that data, shows them. So that's one thing that I really didn't get to have, because we didn't have learning coaches when I was a teacher, and my coaches did that. The other part is that learning and teaching, that's always evolving. The world's changing all the time. New research comes and shows us new ways that we can teach and learn better. So we're kind of always there to help that continue. And also we're just always trying to, it's just part of what teachers do, and we're committed to that. And now Lisa's going to talk about how we measure that, okay?
All right, so as you heard from Andrea, the main goal is to support our teachers in really supercharging student success. Oh, there. Oh, all right, great. And so as we are working on student-centered coaching, our focus is always the student data to start. But student data isn't just unit test scores or the NWBA reports. It's also the kinds of formative data that gives us kind of the more subtle steps to success. So as Andrea mentioned, when we are the extra set of hands and eyes and ears in the room, we can pay attention to some of those more subtle things. We can pay attention to student engagement, not just the percentage of kids that are engaged, but paying attention to the quality of their responses, the way that they're able to piggyback on top of other people's reasoning. We are working on disciplinary literacy. And so we think about, it's not just about what we want kids to be able to do, but what do we want kids to believe about themselves as learners and as collaborators. So as we work on helping kids to think about themselves as mathematicians, we think about maybe a survey that would help get us some self-assessment, some self-perception of like, I like to contribute in class, I feel like I have good ideas, I can usually solve problems. And we think about where do we want kids to end up, and then we kind of work backwards and create surveys and rubrics to help be able to track that, because ultimately we want to be able to plan for and track and then celebrate the student success. At the end of every cycle, we have reflective conversations with the teachers, and they always blow us away with the insights and the connections they make to even previous things that they've been doing, things that they've been wondering, and always they walk away with kind of their own plan for their own next steps, always staying at the edge of their own learning. The peer walkthroughs, every year, each building in Lapeer has an opportunity to do the mini instructional rounds. So it's a planned day where teachers gather in cycles of groups that go through, and we pre-brief, and then we have a chance to see our peers in action. We reflect, and it really gives us a chance to celebrate the growth that we see as a building, and then also to kind of, very realistically compare what we see to kind of our vision of where we want to go, and we set our goals that lead us forward and help guide the professional development that we tackle. And then the administrative walkthroughs, whether it's the building administrators coming through and giving teachers feedback, or the district level leadership coming through, and usually that affirms exactly what we saw as a staff, that we get the feedback from the administrators and we're like, yep, that's exactly what was on our charts too. We saw that, we own that, and that's where we're going. So what does coaching look like? Coaching really is kind of the thread that weaves it all together. So in every coaching cycle, a lot of times when we have a data day, when we have a PD, when we have a PLC, a lot of times those are the conversations that are the beginnings of more formal coaching cycles. So when we decide to work with a teacher, it's always based on data. It might be something that they saw historically that, in the previous years, my students had trouble with this unit. It might be a group cycle where, oh man, we saw the M-STEP data, and we're seeing some downward trends on some of the strands. And so as a whole grade level, we're gonna really hammer on those as tier 1 supports. So we look at the data, a lot of times we co-planning, shoulder to shoulder, and then using that kind of action research to support the teachers in supporting their students. So this is actually a picture of a data day that we just had a couple of weeks ago. And here you can see the teachers are digging into some NWEA data, and they're actually looking at their students' growth just in that semester. So this is not just about how the students scored, but how they're actually growing. This was a guided academics class, so you can see, as it should be, it was targeting students that are not performing at high levels. And so what we were looking at is, now that the students have had a chance to have a guided academics, dedicated intervention, are we able to see some high levels of growth? So in the top left corner, you can see a good majority of the students are making very high growth, and that's what we want to see. And then it lets us troubleshoot, okay, so in those students that are not making significant growth, let's figure out why. Is it some attendance problems, attention problems, or do we need to do some further assessments to make sure that those students are getting the supports that they need moving forward? You'll also see in the lower left corner one of our new tech coaches, Sarah Anderson. She and Stacy Nowak were supporting our teachers in this data day. As we were looking at data, they were there to provide us some training on our new smart boards. The teachers are really excited about them and really want to maximize the effectiveness and the utility of them. So they were there to show us some platforms for creating in-the-moment data collection so that teachers can kind of give a quick check right there on the spot and see what needs to happen next, as opposed to giving an assignment and you have to collect it and grade it. And then also the IXL pilot that we're doing gives us a chance to get some real-time data of exactly where kids are achieving and personalize and differentiate and really have like at your fingertips resources in terms of like a digital carousel of multiple examples that you could use with students, which is really important at upper levels because when you're dealing with algebra and geometric shapes and grids, you can't just kind of pull an example out of thin air. It really has to be kind of well thought out, and so it's a great resource for teachers to be able to have those kinds of things at their fingertips. Also on the walls, you might notice those anchor charts, those posters. Those are good old Hattie anchor charts, and those were actually created a few years ago by our staff. And it was looking at Hattie's high effect size practices, and those continue to be there and continue to be part of the fabric of our work and our conversations. So, just showing that each wave and each initiative of professional development is not just a one and done kind of thing, but teachers are continually adding to their toolbox and integrating as education evolves. So finally, the PLC, Professional Learning Communities, we meet on a weekly basis and always focusing on what we want the students to know. This year, I work mostly with the math. Well, I always work mostly with the math teachers, but this particular year, the Roland Warner math teachers were invited by MSU, the Math Project, to pilot or field test the next iteration of the Connected Mathematics Project, which is the project and program that we use. And that has been just a real wealth of professional development. They had training in the spring and summer and fall and winter, and then on a weekly basis, really unpacking the new lessons and the new trajectories, looking at how those lend themselves into design of assessments, and each week bringing forth a predetermined assessment or quick check so that the teachers come with data and it helps them see where the kids are achieving, where there's issues, and a couple of just nice examples of like the building collective efficacy. A few weeks ago, our 6th grade teachers had some data with them, and they were having a conversation about, one teacher said, my kids are not getting this, and I think we need to spend more time on this concept. And so she, was taking ownership of where her kids were and what she thought she needed to do. And then another more veteran teacher with the program, she said, I I understand what you're saying, but let's take a look at the upcoming lessons. This concept doesn't need to be mastered yet. We're going to come back to it here, and here, and here. So if at this point down the road, they're still not achieving, then we'll go ahead and do MTSS. But at this point, it's still Tier 1 instruction. And so it just was a really nice example of tapping into collective abilities of the teachers and really, everyone's experience and expertise being honored and used. The 7th grade teachers had a really nice example of refining instruction. They were looking at a particularly challenging problem that was coming up, and they were sitting in PLC and they all kind of looked at each other like, what are we supposed to do? Like, what are the kids even supposed to get from this? And so they had all pre-worked the problem, and they were showing each other, and they realized that every single one of them had approached it in a different way. And so they had a really great discussion about that, and they ended up taking pictures of each other's strategies and sharing it out with their own students as a great example of how people think about things differently, and there's just many different strategies to get to the same answer. So the PLCs are very high-level conversations that really do tackle the focus always on the clarity of what we want the students to know, how teachers are measuring that learning, taking into account everyone's abilities, and then continually reflecting and changing and progressing forward for the good of all students. So coming up are some really nice visuals on how we have supported coaching in supporting our business, or not our business goals, our school goals.
So the remainder of our slides here are going to be demonstrating how our learning coaching process is tied into and focuses on our 3 main building goals. Starting with goal number 1, developing clear success criteria that's not only aligned to learning targets, but also demonstrates high quality work with students where they can self-evaluate their own mastery of learning. So not just, hey, nice job, well, you got it. Adults hey, you did a good job. They're looking at a rubric, they're evaluating themselves, hey, am I emerging, am I developing, do I have mastery level understanding of the topic? In the second area, Andy's going to talk about unpacking student self-reflection. So not only, again, are our building goals tied to previous learning, which is Hattie's mind frames, all these high impact, or the most bang for your buck, if you will, practices in the classroom, but also our new initiative, the disciplinary literacy. Up next, Andrew's going to talk about unit unpacking and student self-reflection.
So I get to talk about the exciting things that the teachers are doing. So going along with that whole, here's an example of just some springboard students who, not only the teachers unpacking units, but we have kids unpacking units too. So they're going through the whole unit. They're looking for terms from the unit, deciding have they ever seen these terms before? Do they have they seen them? Can they define them now? They also talk about what the big concepts are. They list what they might know about those concepts. Sometimes this particular teacher is trying out something new where she's having the kids pull maybe a cooking activity they might think would help them learn some of these concepts. So it's kind of becoming more learner-driven, where kids are starting to have more say in what they're doing and reflecting on what they think best practice would be to help them as learners. Here's some examples of student self-reflection. One thing that I've worked out with the English teachers for the last few years is just creating some success criteria rubrics for every single lesson. So we don't have to grab kids' papers anymore and grade them ourselves. If the kids actually have rubrics, and it actually kind of details what each level of success looks like, and they can start determining, do I know this yet? And then later we start to have them create some goals for themselves.
So building goal number 2 is focused on the question of discussion techniques. If you've been in and around our buildings the last 3 years, there is a large focus on Hagen structures, which are largely focused on getting question discussion techniques, collaborative learning, as well as getting feedback for students from multiple sources, not only from obviously instructors and adults, but their peers, probably more so the peers than the adults in the room. This also includes, again, some other practices like getting feedback from multiple sources, as well as conferring with students. And again, you can see how our building goals not only tied to, again, previous PD, Addie's high impact practices, but also our current focus, which was disciplinary literacy practice number 6. Again, related directly to questioning and discussion techniques.
So this is probably my favorite section because our district has brought in Kagan professional development, and I think it's been some of the best, probably top 3 professional development I've ever had. I wish I had it when I first started teaching because it's been pretty life-changing for all of us. So basically, Kagan is a way to engage pretty much every kid in the classroom simultaneously and have some level of accountability. So I don't know if you remember being in the classroom and sometimes the teacher would ask a question, like 5 kids would raise their hand and then 1 kid would answer, and then they'd ask them their question, and the same 5, maybe 2 more raise their hand, and then the teacher would, and there was kind of this ping pong thing that happened, but like the other kids could like relax back there. So Kagan is different in that now kids are kind of numbered at tables and we put them into very specific kinds of intentional groups, and maybe I'm person 1 and there's person 2 next to me, and I'm A and they're B, and then there's 3, 4 across and they're B and A, and the teacher says, okay, person A, here's a question for you. You're going to look at person B, you're going to answer the question, and person B is going to rephrase that question back. So person A, you have 1 minute to say your answer. Person B, now it's your turn, and you're going to rephrase. And now I'm going to spin a spinner, and I'm going to randomly call on table 4, person 4. Can you tell us what you guys talked about? And so you kind of never know. But people had enough time to practice, so they're like not on the spot. It's not, super embarrassing. And the more we do it, the more kids get comfortable. So we have one of our pictures is gone, but we do some things to help build relationships with kids so they're more comfortable in those discussions. So this is an example of a Kagan silly sport. That's the first hour class early in the morning, and the teacher was teaching and saw okay, kids are kind of tired right now, so we're going to do 1 Kagan silly sport, and it's like maybe a minute. This is called Keep It Up, and they're out in the hallway just working together to bring those balloons up, and the blood gets to their brain and they're awake. Our other example was like a Never Have I Ever activity, and that's a class builder, so they get to know each other. So kids are like standing up and they sit down if they've also done a thing or not done a thing. So I think it was like a band question with a little video. So that's very intentional so that they can get to know each other. And the more you know people, kind of the more relaxed you are to have those discussions and not be so afraid and be so shy. Oh, there it is. There's a picture. Super. Oh yeah, they actually have to stand on their chair. I'm gonna be honest, I was watching this and I'm like, oh, they weren't. It's good. Everything's good.
It's the board.
Right. I'm like, Kagan's super fun. Not yet dangerous. So here's an example.
As long as the chairs are only a foot high, we're good.
Now we want to begin our seating.
That's right. Okay. So here's an example. You can see that table map where the students are actually numbered here. And I've already kind of given you an example of that. This one's super exciting. This was a science teacher, and she was a super overachiever because there are probably like 50 structures, and we learned about 8, and she's like, this is one we haven't even learned yet, and she's been doing it. So this one's called the Showdown, and so in the Showdown, the teacher asks a question, or there's a prompt on the table, and the kid read that prompt, and then somebody gets to be the Showdown captain, and all the kids write their answer, and then the Showdown captain says Showdown, and they all throw their answers down. And then the Showdown captain is in charge of going through and checking through the answers. So it is, actually I forgot, they give a thumbs up on the right, and then she yells Showdown. That's why they're not like, hey, look at the picture, they're actually engaged in this. And then another thing that we've been working on is, COVID has happened the last, COVID's happened in the last 2 years. So there's a lot of social skills that, we've been teaching kids, and when we're in English class, kids are giving feedback to each other, but they kind of didn't know what to say, and so a lot of times they'd be like, that word is spelled wrong, or you need a period there, but that's not really getting to deep levels of thinking and improvement. So, we brainstorm as a team, what can we do? Let's have the kids ask questions, because in coaching, you ask questions, and that helps us to think deeper. So maybe the kids can ask each other questions, and we ask the kids questions, so let's teach them to do really good questions. So the kids started coming up with questions like, how could we get somebody to think deeper? So one was, kids just write maybe a personal narrative, and they just have a bunch of events. but it doesn't have meaning. It's supposed to have a meaning or a theme. And then we could just ask them, like, why is this stuff meaningful to you? And that could be a good question. So we started collecting those, and then kids would like use them, and then they would rate like how well that question really helped them with their writing. So then they kept collecting them and moving around, like this one's not going to get rid of that question. So it's really exciting. That was like a new development. I think we use forever, even without code. This is really fun. Building goal 3.
Lastly, we have building goal number 3, which is going to focus on meaningful formative data, but also not just that, it's including students explaining and reflecting on their own thinking to inform their instruction. Again, all 3 of our goals are student-driven. Students are taking accountability, they're actively involved in their own learning. Below that, again, as we said before, we're tying previous PD from Patty as well as current PD from secondary literacy. And again, it's been a real big focus on formative data, not only in the classrooms, through coaching, but in our PLCs as well. Teachers across common preps, for example, all the ELA 7 teachers, all of the social studies 6 teachers will come up with a short 5-question, let's say, formative assessment to give sometime that week when they have that same unit to look at. Again, okay, my kids are here, yours are here, why is that? What are we doing? What can we do different? What can we do better? So again, we've had a really big focus on formative data collection and analysis in our PLC groups on a weekly basis so far this school year. So Ansley's going to take us home with formative assessment and student goals.
Okay, so this is also an example of formative assessment and using technology. So this teacher made a Kahoot, it was super fun. It had music, so they took little lyrics and played this part of a song, and the students were learning about different lit devices and terms. So they had practice with it, and then we actually showed them the song, and they got to listen to it, and then they had kind of a contest with each other to see, like, do they actually know these terms? And like, it gives them immediate feedback. It tells them if they're right away. And then at the end, there's kind of a readout by the teacher, so they know where they are. They went to grade papers. The kids know where they are right in that moment. And I had a cute video of it. It was like a kid dancing, and he's excited to see about these feedback. It's normal. He never been. I'm like, who are you? Here's another example of feedback, like right in the moment. I think when I was younger, I remember like writing a paper and waiting like 3 weeks. Like, you know, if I pass it, you can be like, geez, I see it. No, but so now we do a lot more conference. This is an example of a teacher sitting side by side with the students. They're looking at her grading. They're reflecting, giving her some notes, and then that student has some next steps immediately to work on her writing. Not have to wait 3 weeks and just surprise, you got to see her.
You've never heard that, Andrea.
Right, and so, I mean, kind of on top of earlier, we have rubrics where we have kids actually saying like, all right, I fit this area, I can assess myself. Then later we have kids starting to create their own learning goals for their own success. And that's actually one of Patty's highest impact strategies is kids knowing where they're at, knowing where the learning target is, and creating their own personal goals. It's really motivating. So that's another area that we've been working at, and kind of making it public, so you can commit to those goals too. So thank you. Do you know when your spouse and your friends don't want to hear about your work? You guys have. You have to.
We can't leave.
So just kind of wrapping things up, general themes you've seen is that again, largely what we do on a daily basis is student driven. It's backed with, again, data that's proven, best practice, and again, we're using formative assessment on a daily basis to look at what's working, what's not, and again, how can we get better, how can we get the kids to where we need them to be. So I would thank you for having us tonight. If you have any questions for us, we'll be more than happy to answer.
Any questions or comments?
Is this on all levels, like from K through 12? Like all this?
Coaching?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. I'm trying to figure out if we can do it at work.
They have those.
I mean, yeah, honestly, there's, for each part of what we do, like, it'd be great if we have that type of collaboration. So, it's amazing.
I love the enthusiasm. I love it. I love how you're adding to your toolbox constantly, year after year after year. I love that it's a teamwork approach. It's really not team, it's an army that goes into this. It's unbelievable. So, well,
And the enthusiasm, just and the smiles on your face when you're presenting, it just shows just how connected you are to these kids, and you know, you're showing different examples, and I know that my sons love it when they get a Kahoot, or they do all these fun different ideas that you guys are constantly, like Tim said, just constantly adding to the toolbox and always finding different solutions, and I just love the excitement and enthusiasm, and thank you so much for a great presentation this evening.
Well, Andrea needs a little more excitement if you can work on it. I mean, you gotta, yeah, I mean, maybe a little help.
Unrelated, non-bribery extortion note, there is some RWV club money there for you. Last month, I think with the snow days, the supply chain got disrupted a little bit. That's still good, doesn't go bad, does it?
It's got a shelf like 300 years. You know, it's no secret, you know, how we feel about the learning coaching program. I remember these discussions before we had learning coaches, and Michelle and Kim and I in particular were really debating what the next step for the district was and how we wanted to take it to the next level. And I think it was Andrew that said it. Really wish this type of PD or even learning coach support was available when we all first started teaching. I just remember in 1997 getting the keys to a classroom and basically saying good luck from the principal, and you walk in and it was like, I went to college, I got a degree, but I don't know how to do this, you know, and that feeling, that fear, the art of teaching and the complexity of what these people are tasked with doing in and of itself is a science, right? You get so caught up in your content though and staying ahead of the kids that this teamwork, all the metaphors they use are so accurate because, and Craig, to your point, regardless of what profession you're in, wouldn't it be great to have someone that's not there to evaluate you or to judge you or to criticize you to say, let's have a dialogue about what's best practice and what works for kids and what are some techniques. I would love, as a teacher, to come up with a different way to engage my kids in questions and discussion, as opposed to what Andrew described, which was the experience that every single one of us had. And if you were a passive student, you could get through 13 years of school and never answer a question. And it's like, is that good for you? Maybe you thought at the time, this is great, I'm hiding in the back, but that's the part that I love the most, is that every kid is on their toes. They have to be. So great job. This is the vision that we had, except on steroids, because I never envisioned it would be this engaging, this connected, this team-oriented, and we just need more of it. So,
It is amazing.
awesome.
And everyone is embracing it, not just the teachers, but the kids are. You know, that's the best. Thank you guys so much.
Well done.
Okay, we will head into the public comment portion of our agenda. So a board meeting is a meeting of school district business held in public. It's not a public meeting. The board is not going to respond to those making public comments, but will direct the superintendent to follow up with the presenter. 30 minutes is set aside for public comment, so each presenter is being asked to keep their comments brief. The board does not comment in public on any student and employee, and asks the presenter to be respectful of any person they comment about. Kim Kroll?
Sorry, I haven't been home yet today. We had quiz bowl, washing, and I got to drive my team today. But today I'm here for something different. I'm here to thank you for letting teachers have classroom libraries. English teachers have classroom libraries. I brought this book that you may have seen in the news, and the day after a Tennessee school board banned this book, I put it out on my desk, and I think every student touched it when they walked in. And they were like, what's in the book? Why is it banned? And you know, we all know when we're younger, if you want a kid to do something, you tell them that they can't do it, and then they're gonna do it, right? So if I could teach this book right now, and it's sold out everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I went that night and I bought a copy, and it's #1 bestseller. I could teach this book, and I'm thinking, why did they ban this book? I don't know, there's naked mice and cats in here. That's a whole different story. So, I want to thank you too, because I have some, and I don't want to get emotional, but I have some books in my classroom library that students have told me they have seen themselves this year. I have a book that is challenged called Hey Kiddo by Jared Grzaska. It's about it's a graphic novel, memoir about a student whose parents abandoned him and they're drug addicts. And the student, in a reflection, not to the class, said to me, "Those are my parents." And that was the first time that she had seen herself in a book. I had another student this year read Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rebay. She's a Filipino student, and that is the first time she ever read a book where they acknowledged the main character as a Filipino student. The first time. She's 16. I also have the book, which is banned, challenged everywhere, Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Irwin Expenditure, Race is America and You. It's a book about race. It's like the #1 banned book everywhere. And that one I can't keep on my shelf, and actually my exchange students really want to read it, which I don't understand, but hey, if my exchange students want to read it, that's what I'm here for. If my dream job, besides this one, my next job, is to be a book matchmaker. Like that, I love that. Sometimes I maybe spend too much time on that, but tell me what you want. If any of you need a book recommendation, follow me on Goodreads or send me out an email. We have challenges with reading. We have 140 letters, tweets. We have notifications on Facebook that tell us it's a 2-minute read or a 3-minute read. To get our students to read sustained material, it has to be relevant and they have to see themselves in it. And so I want to thank you for allowing us to have these books in our library and taking up the challenges and backing teachers. So I was able to go to the conference, thank you Michelle, at the end of November, the National Council of Teachers of English, and they had a huge topic on books are windows where we can see through, they're mirrors where we can see ourselves, or they're sliding doors where we can walk into other worlds and see ourselves in the future. And we have that in our classrooms at the high school. We have that in our high school library. I'm just astounded when I go to other districts and they don't have a library in the high school. That just was my mind. So thank you for supporting classroom teacher libraries, and thank you for supporting our school libraries.
Thank you. That's dark.
Good evening. My name is Beth Darga, and I'm the Vice President of our LCS unit. Some of you may remember me over the last year. We are the unit that consists of secretary and heroes. This past fall, I attended an MBA training where I was introduced to an idea that I thought would be a wonderful way for us to implement in our unit to hold each other up in recognition. Recognition of our members who go above and beyond regularly, if not daily, and all of the hard work that we do in our buildings. So ballots were sent out and many nominations were received. So tonight we recognize the first of our many LESP members of the month. So tonight I would like to introduce you to Tina Capshaw and Teresa Henry, our Transportation Department Secretaries. Tina and Teresa are the first line and sometimes the last line for our parents at the bus garage. Tina has been an employee for Lapeer Schools for 20 years, and Teresa had been with the employee for 21 years. So they have put in substantial years with our district. So because I don't want to run out of time, I'm only going to read a couple of the nominations for these ladies. The first nomination is that they have both done a phenomenal job working at the bus garage. They have continuously put in so many long, hard years to make sure that our district is running the best it can with all of our transportation issues. Another nomination is these ladies go above and beyond for both our families and our staff. They work countless hours of overtime and are often the only ones left in the building to keep things running when everyone else is called to drive a bus. They are both veteran employees who go the extra mile to get the job done. So ladies, I want to congratulate both of you and thank you for all of the hard work that you've done for our district.
We'll head into our reports. Mrs. Novak, would you please share with us the Finance and Operation Committee report?
We met on January 19th of this year. We started at 2:03 p.m. via Zoom with myself, Brad Hagon, and Summer Putnam, for our committee members. Others attending were Matt Mondry, Mark Rader, Danielle Corfield, Mike Priest, Stephen Melcourt, and Mary Moss. So we discussed first the emergency repairs, rolling water sewers. Mark Rader explained that in the fall of 2021, 2 manhole sewers started caving in at Rolling Water campus due to deterioration. Due to the severity of the situation, we received an initial work quote of $21,500. Formal bids were not sought due to the onset of winter weather and the need to repair the area quickly. Once repair work began, the amount of required work increased by an additional $10,000 due to the deteriorated state of the pavement. Emergency repair was done. He shared the invoice from Tortoise Brothers Trucking and Excavating in the amount of $31,685 with the committee. Next, we discussed ESSER funds. Director of Finance, Danielle Corfield, updated the committee on the ESSER funding and where the district is currently at with the spending plans. Almost all of the ESSER 1 funding has been utilized, just waiting on a few remaining smart words to come in. An amendment has just been submitted to the Michigan Department of Education for ESSER 2 funding. Lastly, the spending plan has been submitted by the required deadline for ESSER 3 funding. We discussed, lastly, the security camera bid. Mark Rader, along with Senior Technology Coordinator Mike Priest and Technology Director Stephen Melcourt, explained that since November of 2020, Oakland Schools Field Service On-Site Technology Team has been evaluating the current security camera systems in the district, as well as identifying gaps in security camera coverage. The need for a replacement system that meets today's standards and demands is overdue. The district submitted an RFP for a replacement and upgrade of the security camera system in December of 2021. They have evaluated bids from 8 vendors based on key factors such as technology specifications, adherence to specifications, prior experience with security camera installs, understanding the needs of the district, and timeline. They are recommending CBTS to purchase hand-lock security cameras and milestone servers, including installation in the amount of $368,868.86, with a district-managed contingency for the project in the amount of $36,868 or 10%. It was the consensus of the committee that the board approve the bid as recommended. It is placed on the board agenda for this evening for full board approval, and the meeting will adjourn at 2:32 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Novak. Any questions or comments? Okay. That concludes our reports for this evening. Let's head into our presentations. Superintendent Walker, here.
Thank you, Madam President. Introduce this is Superintendent Mark Rader, Business and Operations, to share our budget development process and forecast enrollment update. Mark.
Good evening. Well, I just love it. But I will say that with Matt and Ken's assistance, we have pared this down over the years. The revenue conference was in January, and I just eat up all the information that comes, partly because it is wealth of information that you will never see in the news, you'll never see announced for schools. But between the lines, it tells us what's going to happen with our funding, or what to expect for our funding, which is obviously our most important. So tonight we're going to go through a number of things. I'm going to hit first on the development process, hit people count, hit expenditures, hit revenue, kind of talk about COVID, and COVID dollars, but at a high level just as a refresher, and finish with our risk of something. Because the good news is we're in the best financial position we've seen in the last 10 years. The bad news is there's lots of hands in that pot fighting over who's going to take it for what. So that's good news, but it's cautious news, as I said. So with that, I'll start to get into details. So you've seen this slide before, there's no surprise here. Revenue conference happened in January. We got very good news, both general fund, school aid fund, and the overall economy This year, it's a little bit less hectic than last year. We only have one collective bargaining unit expiring in June, so Kim and I are in the process of actively bargaining that contract right now, the successor contract. Today was the day of the governor, if you caught the news, so she released her budget. And I'll get to some of the details of that later because that's the cautious side. It's good, but it's cautious for us. And then we'll anticipate the Senate and the House. We'll have budget managers meeting, much of the same information we shared with them in March, and then start to work through our forecast. What do the numbers mean? Today was not only the governor speaking, but today was also what? It's quiz. What was today? Matt?
Okay.
February count, right?
National Teens Day?
Well, it was that too. It was that too, Lisa.
Not 5 days.
Should have said it, we should have been better. And so obviously we've got counts October and February. February is at 10%. You'll see some more of that detail here later with regards to that. But overall, as we work through, I was reflecting when the governor, reading some of the governor's notes today, and it didn't dawn on me until I saw this note. So prior administration, it's not a reflection of either political party. We were getting budgets for school aid before July 1. Still not early enough for us because it was occurring in June. We've got to develop many of our assumptions well before that time period. But since the change in the governorship, we haven't had a school aid budget before July 1st. And there's a chance we may not see one this year, even though things are better and more predictable than we've had since March 13th, 2020, when COVID started and changed all of our lives, right? So that's what bothers us, because as we have to put a budget together, and as we have to present to not only the board but the public, it is our best estimate of information. And it is bothersome to us when it changes the day we adopt a budget. Because it tends to show someone who's not familiar with our budget process or schools that we don't necessarily know what we're doing. We absolutely know what we're doing, right? But we are constantly having to change. So the budget is just a guide. It's not an absolute document, and we're always changing that document. So global, what happened? Well, the economy is outpacing projections. We've heard for almost 2 years, beware COVID's going to slow everything down, and we've seen it, right? We have seen some negatives. The workforce, the third bullet there. That still is challenging for any industry, any business, any entity who has human manpower as their source of getting work done. And there seems to be no end to that. So that is a problem that we're watching because it impacts us. You've seen this week, we've had to cancel bus runs again because of the lack of staffing. And it's a variety. It's not just workforce, it's COVID, it's sick, it's a variety of issues. So I don't want to mislead that it's blaming any particular one, but it's the challenge where 3 years ago, we had 6 and 8 spare drivers. On a given day, if we had folks for whatever reason, we still didn't have a problem. And so that is one of those areas. The state's benefiting from billions in infrastructure dollars called COVID dollars. That's for 1, 2, 3. Matt's heard me, Colt's heard me. I'm still concerned. My job is to be the cautious one of the group, budget conservative. So COVID dollars will end in 24, and that's with the extension. But what I'm worried about is the funding cliff. I'm worried about the funding cliff for the state. I'm worried about it at the federal level, and I'm worried about what it means to our school. And you'll see some of this detail later when I start to show you some of the funding dollars. We're still worried about the recovery being slowed because of COVID as it continues to do this up and down sine wave of surge or little surge. Omicron variant. Now there's been talk of a fourth booster possibly to deal with the new version of it, right? And so all those wear on the public's confidence, and so that's wearing still on all of the workforce. Federal Reserve. I throw this one in here because that's a big one. We have been earning a whopping 1/10 of a percent in our CDs. We have to invest very conservatively. We basically had for almost 3 years now 0 passive income. Where 3 years ago, if we look at the budget, it's about $100,000 on our idle funds. That's always a concern because that's one of those revenue items for us that we would use
our overall budget. That indicator is bothersome on both ends there. Read between lines. 3 or 4 rate increases a year. Again, the quiz. We haven't had 2 rate increases in the last 3 years. So 3 to 4 a year. For even a non-financial person says, the Feds are worried about inflation. They're going to try to slow that puppy down. You're going to see in a later slide what was cost of living last year. CPI was 7%. Inflation is on a runway right now. It's a short-term item though. It's not a long-term. It's not a long line. It's a short one. It's going to come back down and level back off. It's still problematic. And then the fossil fuels. I put that up there because this is a huge shift. And folks, I don't think realize what this shift means to us as a school district with buses, with diesel fuel, but also what's our future. Remember, I'm trying to always buy a 9-year replacement for 60-some buses. I'm looking basically a decade. My future tells me in a decade we're going to see electrified buses or something even more advanced beyond that. And so obviously we start making investments in diesel that becomes obsolete, we're going to have to spend twice. So we're watching these kind of points when I put them in the presentation every year, because these are all little things we're looking at. Are they absolute? No. It's a moving target all the time. But fossil fuels with cost of gasoline, as electricity goes up in the demand, the price is going up. As the utilization of gasoline and diesel goes down, the price is going to go up because those are good suppliers and then retailers still want to make their profit. So we're seeing what's gasoline. Well, drive vehicles, I think even if you drive electric, but hybrid, gas is over $1.50 higher than it was a year and a half ago. So that's why the inflation is up. On the revenue side, here's the one we always focus on. Why? We focus on the pupil and the amount of foundation allowance. And so a number of slides here just to talk about that because it is positive. You see the number I have out there, 8,700. So a year ago was 8,100. And we had a $589 increase. Thank goodness to COVID dollars, which really is why, along with, you'll see in the slide, 43,000 students who dropped off the state goals through the COVID in the spring or fall of 20. And so the red I left up there, which was fiscal 22, returns to 90-10 count, because last year we were on what we call the super blend. It was a hybrid. So to keep things simple, we basically, and you're going to see a fund balance slide here later on and say, wow, we're just rolling in money in our fund balance. Had we not had that super blend, we had $3.3 million less. That differential got us 3.3 and kept us in the positive versus being on a cliff trying to figure out where we cut dollars last year. So, and we're not the only district, that's why they did that, because we were one of hundreds who were in that similar position. So that's back to our normal, 90-10. So we watched the fall counts, 90%. Previous spring, so this spring today, this will affect next year's count, not this year's count. And so we're always looking at these data points. But that was a huge help to school districts and us in Lapeer at Super Blend last year. I didn't want that to be lost in 1 year anomaly. So here's the pupil count I was referring to. So you see this steep drop. This is the 43,000 students who were lost. And you see where the old trajectory line was, which is the purple line. And now you see the new blue line. Now that's bad news if you're a district who's losing enrollment. When you look at the global aspect of this for the state, that's what allowed a $589 increase with COVID dollars last year, because the money went a lot further for the remaining 1.4 million students in the state. And so that looks like we thought, you'll see again in a couple of slides, our 400 we lost, they didn't return. Same thing, district-wide in October of 21, state did not see these 43,000 students return to public ed. Wherever they went, they stayed. And so it helps us financially, but it is bothersome to see that big loss of students. And so here you see this slide year after year, and we're in the process of getting this updated. This was fall of 2019. Stanford consultant Fred does 5-year forecasts This will be the third time in my tenure here that we'll be getting a new updated forecast. And so you see, in 1920, we were actually at that level. We were at 49, wrote it down so they didn't forget it, 49, 40. So we were almost exactly on the most likely scenario that Fred had predicted. Then you saw the COVID, and you saw how we dropped. And we dropped down to the red line, which is the low. And now 2 years in a row, we're down in that level. So that's a big change for us. Our trend line for predicting enrollment has changed. 2 years is not a trend, but it's going to change from what we've been predicting for the last few years, and we're going to watch that. This chart will be interesting when I get the information at the end of the month from Fred to see how do these lines get steeper on the downward, do they get flatter and just they're lower. There's good news though. I think it was 3 weeks ago, GM's going to invest in Lake Orion, a huge EV, electrical vehicle propulsion plant there. We're always looking. Fred looks for stuff. He'll ask me what kind of big changes. Why? Because that could bring, families into the community and school. Those are the big things he looks for to change just the birth rate indices. That's really the basis for most of the projections. And so we had this slide last year, and we pointed out last year because this was such a huge change. In 2019, we had 235 for virtual. Last year with the COVID, we ballooned almost 1,200, and now this year we dropped back down to 380. But the good news is when we look at our numbers, really what happened is 2/3 of those virtual just moved back into our face-to-face, as my acronym up there, F2F, face-to-face return this year. So that was good news. We did not lose any more to the phenomenon of COVID. They just returned back to the confidence in the classroom. So that was a good thing for us. And so this is the running 10-year total. And you can see we had the 400 we lost last year, second column from the right. This year it's only 48, and it went the opposite way. So remember I just said our trends are changing, so we actually went up 48 students from the previous year. That's great news. But it doesn't help when usually I'm recommending our old history. If you look at the bottom here, we're at 173. Those aren't what we budgeted. We had budgeted down for about 3-4 years ago. We were at about 125. The last 2 years, we've estimated down 75 students, and that's been the fair. That's probably what I'll still recommend, because you can see, the numbers are getting better, but they're still overall for the graduating senior class, the incoming kindergartners, it's a lower number. Why? We know the birth rate hasn't changed in the last decade. It's still less than 1, and it's going to settle in somewhere around, probably for us, of the county births that will get into 300 kindergartners coming in 5 years later after birth. So it's good news, but again, it's caution that it's changing what we're used to seeing. Now go back to a level of the state and local revenue. This slide is on here for one and only purpose, and it changed this morning when the governor spoke. My initial concern was, out of the school aid fund, there is $764 million that is used for higher ed. The governor announced today a 5% increase to higher ed in her 22-23 budget. Our concern is that number is going to start to inch back up towards $1 billion coming out of the school aid. And why? Because you're going to see the school aid is pretty flush with money. So is the general fund, but the general fund can't afford those kind of increases because their biggest budget is not operational, but it is the prisons. And that is a huge cost to the state's general fund when you dig into the details. So this is concerned because we in the education community have been concerned for years. We could have had higher foundation allowances in years when the money is being shifted over to the general fund. And so we constantly are watching that as an indicator in the budget process. So now on the expenditure side. Some things haven't changed for the last couple of years, so some of you just say, hey, I've seen these slides before. Why haven't we changed? Well, the benefit cost is always an interesting one. We've had about 3 to 5 years of what I would say least predictable benefit costs, and we've seen some of a downward trend. A lot of that is dealing with managed healthcare and RXs. And now what we're seeing is, on the RX side, is all the specialty drugs. I'm probably not using the most appropriate term medically, but these are the cocktails that are very expensive, that are $19 and $25 and $50,000 a dosage, that you don't see in volume, but they change the estimates that are done for the healthcare increases. And so that's starting to trend in a different direction. For years, we were managing the prescriptions down and keeping our healthcare costs reasonable. Now those are starting to go up, so we're going to be watching that. The wage I already talked about, and COVID, the impact of COVID has probably stuck with us for, I'm going to say, probably almost another decade. Because it's going to be a long time before we come out of it. But the local and regional wage pressures, I think the governor had $2.35 for nursing homes and caregiver type increase, and she already did an increase similar to that. Those kind of increases, if they come to fruition, put extreme pressure on the overall wage and hour for our budget, for our units. And so, again, it's a point I'm watching to see how it's going to impact us. I already mentioned CPI was 7%, and CPI was kind of an anomaly that caught everyone off guard, but if for all of us consumers, it didn't surprise us. 3 driving factors: fuel, food, and building materials. And all those are outrageous, and that's if you can find building materials, and you can find food some days in the grocery store. So that's why we're at the 7%. It is inflationary, and why do I worry about that? Because when inflation happens, people's discretionary income, they pull back, and that means sales tax drives 60% of the school aid fund. That's why Mark is always concerned about that. Aging facilities hasn't changed. We still have concerns about our buildings. Security, obviously, after the Oxford incident, has been first and foremost and will continue to be. It was before that. It just was unfortunate that that happened. And so now we're all focusing on that. There are some COVID dollars tied to that, but the problem with COVID dollars is there's so many restrictions, and they keep changing the rules on us. And so all these bullets on this slide will continue to have pressure on our budget. And the bus one is probably the biggest one, as I mentioned earlier, because we're so far behind in replacing our fleet on a regular basis. And this year it's been exacerbated, as you can see the second from the bottom bullet. We've had 2 buses total this year. So we don't factor in when we're replacing the 8 buses, a bus to be totaled. We're hoping when we replace that, once we get that 9th-year set of buses, we use those as what we call our sub-buses. So when we've got preventive maintenance or a breakdown, we can still utilize those for a couple of years. Well, now we're starting to lose those, and one of those is a special needs bus, so that's even more costly for us to replace. Technology. Mike and Steve have a presentation after me on technology, so I'm not going to go into detail on this because their presentation will go into a lot of detail. But honestly, technology was also thrust on us with COVID, with the remote learning, and so we've had this push to get to one-to-one. We're getting there, we're working at it, and Steve and Mike's presentation will show you the path so that when the funding of the COVID dollars end, hopefully we've got a schedule that we can manage out of the general fund in the successive years that won't bankrupt the budget. Because remember, you're going to see these are large dollar amounts that in a normal year you can't afford usually to budget as an operating cost. Retirement, I always put up, because retirement's one of these things that's going to be long with all of us for years to come. You're going to see on the slide it's 2039. So I didn't think 2022 was a long way off years ago, and so 2039 is probably going to come faster than I thought, but it's a long way to being funded, but it's certainly concerned because it grabs a ton of money, 1.5, almost 1.7 billion in total off the top of the school aid fund. And so here's a little snippet of what comes off the top. So this 147C you see up there, 1.5 billion, that is going to be a huge chunk in the next slide It's going to be represented by the green, and then those other three elements is the purple. And so these are dollars that the state is funding out of the school aid fund. And essentially to do that 147C, every month we get a check for about $3 million, and 5 days later we're required to send it right back to the state because it's what's paying for the retirement. So here's the slide. So what we pay, 20.96. This purple down here is, or bluish, is what we pay as an employer. The purple are those three smaller off the top, and the green is that 1.5 billion TEP fund. Now you see the dotted line actually represents the true rate. So here that is showing the rate. So you see the first little cliff here. This little cliff in 2029 represents when there's two parts to our retirement system for state school employees. There's the pension side and there's the healthcare side. And those that are in the defined benefit, come 2029, it's going to be fully funded, as they shifted years ago to cash basis versus accrual. And so that's good news. So you see the first drop. The second drop out in 2039 is when the defined benefit legacy costs are fully funded and no longer a drag. And so that, as I pointed out last year, in 2039, that will free up $4 billion in the school aid fund for funding. So,
And Mark and I are excited to present 2039 board.
I think we have officially put our record. I will come out of retirement, but I don't want to be around 2039.
I'm not working.
I thought you were in this for the long haul.
I've been.
You said that.
17 years, okay.
So here's the rate. So a lot on that chart and trying to keep it simple. So what this really, the high line, the dotted line is really the implied, as we call it, total rate for budget. So it's 43%. What we pay, so on premium, we pay as an employer 28, 15 is at 1.5 billion. If the state wasn't using part of the school aid fund, 1.5 billion represented by the 15%, then we would be paying 43% versus the 28%. And that's why this is up here, because that's still our liability. We're just using dollars that will come to us in foundation allowance up front to fund this. One way or the other, we're funding it as a school environment. And then you can see, even for the change that occurred in 2012, Kim, when the benefits
Just
changed.
my contribution.
Yeah,
Before that, 10,
maybe
11.
before that. There was a 10, 11, it started, but after 12, you had to make the choice. And so you can still see from DC, the sizable cost for the employer is still 20.96. But what's important, if I went back a slide, the legacy cost for the DC, there's no legacy cost because it's done. And so that's the benefit of that change. State retirement system did theirs in 2000, and we didn't do ours. And it cost, if we would have done ours for education in 2000, it was like $235 million that it would cost us, but it wasn't the money to fund it. When they finally got around to doing it, now you see the billions that it's costing us because of the amount of retirees and the accrued benefits for those who are vested into the system. ESSER, really quick. Coronavirus, nothing's changed. Got all the same pots as we had last year. Nothing's changed with the allocations that came from the feds. The big point that we focus on really is this ESSER 2, because even though it's 5.8 million, only 66% has been allocated to districts or that we are eligible, so about 3.8 million. So there's still a sizable amount of money the state has not decided how to use it. And you're going to hear me make comment a couple slides what I think it's going to be used for. So here was the fund balance. And Kim and I debated, what do we call this? Because this is right out of our audit, and it's referred to as fund balance expenditures. Well, there's really not expenditures on here, so I took that label off and just put it as budget development considerations, because really what it shows is, yes, fund balances have improved, and fund balances in the last 3 years, and actually the last two, when you look at 20 and 21, that are the impact of COVID have increased. On the far right-hand side, even though at the audit time, the statewide average wasn't available, it's available now in something like 18.4, 18.5%. So we still lag in the 3 to 4, almost 5% points from the state average. Not complaining because we're healthy. But you gotta remember, we're healthy because of one-time dollars. And once the one-time dollars go away, we're back to the life we had back in 2018-17, where we're gonna have to have a balanced budget. And if we still have declining enrollment, balance that with hopefully increases in the per pupil allowance to offset the students we lose in the future year. So budget risk, get the summary here. Global unemployment rates below 4%. That's good news, but there's 3.5 million people who aren't working. That's how many vacancies in employment are still out there. We don't know why people won't come back to work. And I say we, that's the top economists, U of M, state of Michigan, haven't figured it out. Supply chain stress, it's lingering, and at the revenue conference, as you can see, predicted to last well into 2024. And every time there's a global event, it keeps pushing that date further out. So I don't think that date, we will see the end. I think, like I said, we will see COVID go for at least 5 years and maybe another decade, quite frankly. Another wave of COVID, we don't know. That's the big question mark in the room, and that's what's going to do the economy. Is it what was interesting in the revenue conference is we focus here in Michigan, and not to diminish the COVID numbers, but we focus locally, and then we focus at the national level. The big impact of COVID is it is totally disrupting the emerging markets. It's decimating the Africas and the areas where the emerging markets will manufacture and come from. Everyone still thinks it's China, and some can probably school me on it, quite frankly. But those are things that when you start to hear, it starts to make sense why we're still struggling and we're watching those things, and it's not going to change anytime soon. They don't have the technology, they don't have the infrastructure to deliver the medicine, and they don't have the dollars in their overall GDP economy to even afford it. They need help from countries like us and others. And then the monetary policy I talked about earlier, we're going to keep an eye on that. Like I said, there's this little blip of inflation for a couple years, but then it's going to level back off. The leveling back off is what is bothersome, because when it levels back off, that's going to go into the 2025 school year. And so when it levels off and there's not growth in the economy, that means there won't be revenue growth in the school aid fund, which will afford us an increase in the foundation allowance in a couple of years. This was an interesting chart I put in because it's no surprise to any of us in this district, and probably most districts in the state of Michigan, that you see the bottom line, the green line, is lower ed services is the slowest to recover from the pandemic, and they don't even show us recovering back to the baseline going out almost 18 months. That's going to be a struggle for us in this business, not just Lapeer, but in schools in general. And that's not a good economic indicator from the economists right there. You can see others, blue collars, already recovered, is going to recover pretty healthy above it, and then higher ed is going to get back to it. But we're going to lag it. So that's going to be a concern. Kid knows it first and foremost of all of us in HR, but we're all concerned about it. State, local, COVID, said local inflation. It's the fastest in Michigan since 1981. That was a shock to me. That's 40-some years ago that Michigan, again, we lead, and we always lead for the wrong reasons sometimes, that our inflation is leading the nation's inflation growth. A lot of that's still tied to our automotive and our manufacturing base. Job openings sky high, and Detroit Free Light sales recovered at a lag. And that is the barometer, like it or not, we have to always watch as what goes on with that automotive sector. So to finish up, good news, school aid funding. So we see it is going to grow. So the bottom here, the current fiscal year, 21, when it ended in September for the state, ended better than they thought even last May at the May revenue conference. Coming in this year, these numbers improved. And so we're gonna have a $4.8 billion surplus in the school aid fund by September of '23. Now, you all say, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, let me just read what the governor proposed today that will tap into that little basis. So, good news, 5% increase foundation allowance, $435. We already knew these numbers, and if I had the revenue, but there's way too much information to have on one slide. Just the revenue growth in each year could afford around a $500 foundation increase for fiscal '23 and fiscal '24. And that would take the fund balance of the school aid fund down to about half, about $2.4 billion at September. So we know there's money in there to give us a foundation increase. The problem is, the governor gave us a hint today, 5% for colleges. She wants 361 million to open 40 school-based health clinics. She wants to continue free preschool funding for 4-year-olds. That's all coming out of COVID dollars today. So the question is, who's going to fund that in 2 years? School aid fund can't afford all these things long term. And so, the big one she threw out today, and it's had everyone's attention for about 6 weeks, $2.3 billion of school initiative to deal with our teacher shortage. And it sounds great, and it is. But is she taking it out of here? Is she using the balances I referred to a few slides ago of the difference between the 1/3 of the $5.9 million that the state got for COVID dollars that hasn't been allocated yet? We're waiting for the details. And we got a little hint today from the House Appropriation Chair that he is about at the other end of the book, and from the governor on what he thinks the priority should be for funding. So it will be interesting when we see the Senate and the House's versions come out. I think we'll see about $400 to $500 in foundation increase, so that's good news for us. But it's the rest of it that we're worried about, because if that whittles away in 2 years, we do have some serious financial issues in schools from fiscal '25. Back in the booth. Questions?
I'm surprised it should be in a governor's election year that we wouldn't have a budget. You got drive the draw?
I think, and listening, just my interpretation, listening to the revenue conference in January, though everything seems to be pointing to good news, there is very hesitant optimism by legislators, economists, and such, because we've been on such a yo-yo for almost 2 years now, right? Coming up 2-year anniversary of it. And so that's what they're watching. So I think they're all going to hold their cards for final until May, and then we may see some, strong, arm wrestling come May, maybe have by early June, mid-June, consensus budget. They may do 60-80%, pull a couple items off, on the general fund. It'll be interesting. If the trends continue, May's numbers will probably look better than the January numbers. And that'll be great for all of us.
But in prior years, that always has affected, right?
Right.
I mean, it always has.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's COVID.
Right. The question would be is watching forward, because remember, our business likes to think when there's money, everyone's looking for it. But we've got to use caution, because that money is one-time dollars. We know we have some real needs that we have to address that were deferred in the last decade because of tight dollars in schools back in 2012 and slightly before, coming out of the recession. And so, yeah, it's good, but it's cautious.
And the interest rate's going to play a huge role. For us as well, we could have things.
Right. Yep.
Any other questions?
Weren't you supposed to end on high?
I'm still optimistic we're going to get.
Cautiously optimistic and not
Being smart. You gotta work on your approach.
It's a rolling prosperity.
I want you to bring your crystal ball with you. Spin it.
Well, we know he's not gonna be retiring.
17 more years?
Yeah.
They say the last 17 is the best 17. Is that, I've got a bumper sticker somewhere.
Yeah. Mark's car.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks.
Next up is our district technology plan.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Steve and Mike from Open Schools to really start to dive into what the next phase of our district's tech plan looks like. So with that, Steve, introduce yourself on board. And
Thank you. Good evening. I met some of you, but for those of you who haven't, Steve Melchor, Director of Technology at Open Schools. I'm actually one of 4 directors that provides leadership to our field service districts, which you're one of 16 districts we provide this in-house service to. So I've been with Open Schools for 10 years. I work very closely with Mike and the coordinators in his position in our other districts to basically, strategize and kind of talk about what's going on in the county. So we are kind of like alive. So we don't have to rebuild the wheel every time we have a new initiative or a new technology idea. We've already kind of built some of these. So you guys will see briefly benefits of that. So this crazy little slide of little green boxes, I don't expect you to read all of that, but what this represents is the resources that are available to Lapeer. This is our technology services organizational chart, actually. We are getting close to 200 people on our tech team. Each one of these little boxes is a person that is on our tech team that has knowledge and experience that we can tap into at any point. So this is, we have an applications team, we have our service desk team that really is at like the core of our service that we provide on a daily basis. And then you'll see the people all over the county who work in districts that are doing a lot of the same and different things that we're trying to do here at Lapeer. So this is kind of just like a visual of all the resources that you guys are actually getting on a daily basis, and all the big brains on this chart. So you might recognize these 2 handsome gentlemen. This is myself and Mike Reese. We're basically the leadership for the team. Again, I'm a resource to Mike and to other districts in the county. Mike really is your boots on the ground, day-to-day leadership for our support team that you're going to meet here, because I think it's always important to put faces to the work. So Brandon is the newest team member. He's our senior technical support specialist. He's really the lead tech of our team. He really provides leadership and vision and strategy to the rest of the group. Steven, you'll probably recognize. He's been with Lapeer for a long time. He is an integral part of our team. He's got all the historical knowledge. He knows the ins and outs of the district. He knows all that, and that's been such a benefit to our team to be able to tap into his knowledge and his resources. Austin and Tyler, these are the guys with the running shoes on. These are the guys running building to building, classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher, on a daily basis, with all of the responding to the support tickets that they're putting in with our service desk. And as you can tell, they're smiling because they love their job. So we love having those guys on the team. This is David. So David is our assigned network administrator. David's the guy that does all the behind the scenes server, cabling, fiber, all that stuff. Integral part. But he's not just one person. David has a backup. Our backup to David is Connor. Connor actually works for me down in the Full Park schools. But they actually have a team of 7 network administrators, and they all collaborate. They're all intertwined with their knowledge of what kind of technologies we have in the district. So we have a redundant support team of network administrators. So that's a really important part of our team. And you can see the 13 staff from the big org chart of all the little green squares. Those are our network operations team hosted in Waterford. Those are the guys that really know the back end stuff. The stuff that goes way over my head, but a huge part of our team. So this is a list that includes, but is not limited to, some of the services that Lapeer is getting with Open Schools. I mentioned in-person classroom technology and teacher support. That's Austin and Tyler, Stephen and Brandon running around the district, help the teachers, admins on a daily basis. David with the on-site network infrastructure. Excuse me, just got my voice on that. I lost it so random. And we also collaborate with Lapeer ISD, obviously, on network and infrastructure. We also do collaboration with our curriculum team on planning for the classroom of the future. We mentioned the smart boards and coming up with strategies on how to integrate that into our curriculum and what that really means. So that's an important part of what we do, because it's important for us not to just put technology into the classrooms. It's how is that technology getting us to the goal where we're trying to do? Are we moving the needle, and how does that work? We also assist with project planning. Mike and the team in the last year with all the network upgrades and all the emails you guys see when we're doing all these upgrades and changes. That's a huge part of what we do, trying to get Lapeer up to the latest and greatest as far as network infrastructure and the latest technologies. Also, one of our biggest things, and this is kind of a little bit was increased because of COVID, also was cybersecurity. When COVID hit and everybody started working remote, and everybody started doing more work online, these hackers and cyber hackers were just like, all right, let's go. Everybody's on the computers. What can we do? So these are things we're talking about. Multi-factor authentication, educating our staff on, what are they looking for in emails? What does a phishing email look like? What are things to click on, not to click on? And then also providing guidance on security. I know that's a thing that you guys are going to hopefully approve this evening is our security camera system. Mike and I work very closely with our security team. We have security specialists at Oakland schools that focus on security cameras, the latest and greatest technologies, what the angles of the cameras look like, what they cover. So we have a really core team that knows a lot about that. Mike and I work very closely with them on getting that RFP out, evaluating it, and making the recommendation that you look at tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mike. Mike's worked very hard on this since you guys hopped on board with us. He's worked a lot with Mark on budgeting. So this is really like our strategic plan, our roadmap, where we've been, where we are, and kind of where we're going. Thanks.
Steve. Good evening, everyone. Steve told me that he'd let me do the fun part. Not sure how that worked out. That's okay. So you remember I came to before you guys last year, presented to you recommendations for a lot of our equipment, for our switches, wireless, all those fun things. So I want to take a moment to kind of revisit that, talk about where we were, where we're at now, and then where we're going forward. So with that, this slide was probably familiar to you from last year. Everything we do is about building to support the curriculum delivery process. We talk about PSs, network switches, devices, phones, and security that's become a big issue recently in classroom technology. So with that, we started with the infrastructure pieces, the fibers, the switches, and the wireless solution. In the last year, we've replaced our wireless solution in the district, so we now have one access point in every classroom. The benefit of that is you're taking that singular network cable, spreading it amongst 30 devices, whereas previously, when you were sharing access points between classrooms, you may have 90 devices trying to share that one access point. So now you're actually improving the bandwidth for all of your students and the devices that we're providing them so that it's really benefiting the curriculum delivery process. We've replaced our network switches behind the scenes in the closets. We now have network switches that have been upgraded at Roland Warner, Turtle, High School, Butts Garage, and Murphy. We do have a few remaining buildings that we need to upgrade. Obviously, Mark mentioned the supply chain, the delays and all of that. It's really pushed back our timeline to get that done. We're waiting on the vendor to receive the product. But as they're receiving product, they're sharing with us what they have, and we're building out the plan to keep moving that forward. In fact, I'll be talking to the Colt team next week about our next step of implementing some of this equipment here in the next, hopefully next month or so. And then we installed the UPSs in every network closet. Again, power goes out. It's important those things stay up and running. Our admin staff in the office, they need to make those calls here to the administration building and say, hey, we just lost power. This keeps the phone system up and running, and it keeps everything working for approximately 30 to 40 minutes throughout the building. So what came after building those switches and the wireless access points? Now we start talking about devices for staff and students and that content delivery. So in the last year, we've rolled out new laptops to all of staff starting in spring of last year. Every new teacher that's part of the LEAs received a new laptop that gives them the flexibility of taking that device with them when they go home to do lesson plans, that when they go to professional development, they can take that device with them. They're no longer tethered to a desktop in their classroom. So that was really important for us. And then you heard mention of the smart boards. I absolutely love seeing that, seeing the smart boards in use. We purchased those last fall. It took quite a while to get those in, again, the delays in the supply chain. But we now have 50 of those installed throughout the district. And we're planning on purchasing approximately 50 more using various dollars from grant funds in a couple of our buildings and trying to increase the fleet of smart boards. What's important is it's not just about the board being a display device, but seeing how they're actually integrating the content with that board, delivering it is really what the vision was when we first started talking about that smart board initiative. So what's student technology look like there? We currently have one-to-one Chromebooks available for all students in our secondary buildings. Zimmer, Roland Warren, and the high school. We're also providing them to Crampton through a virtual program. We have one-to-one touch Chromebooks available for our youngest students, our young 5th through 1st grade students. And working with Michelle, the decision was to go with a touch Chromebook because it provides that tactile functionality for our youngest students. They're still learning, some of them are still learning that alphabet, but really learning a keyboard and having numbers or letters that are just jumbled everywhere is sometimes complicated. So the touchscreen provides that transition into using a keyboard and typing in their username and password and getting in using things. And I mentioned the Lapeer virtual partnership. We have one-on-one devices there as well. So content delivery. In the last year, working with Aaron Hughes, who is our integration specialist here in Lapeer, we've been able to roll out the Clever app, which is free to the district, but it actually allows for single sign-on to all these different websites that students use. So in the past, a student would go to the website, type in their user ID and password. 30 minutes later, another website, type in their user ID and password. And eventually, yes, great, because they can remember the password from repetitiveness, but at the same time, it actually now makes it simpler for them to go to one website, log in, and that website will log them into all their other sites. It really simplifies the process for the teacher to get the student to really deliver that curriculum. We've rolled out Go Guardian for classroom management. Again, it allows the teacher to see what's going on from their computer, what the students are doing, and really kind of make sure that they're on task, and if they're off task, kind of bringing them back slightly. And then obviously Google Classroom is a big part of the initiative even before Open Schools got on board. And that's really why we started looking at the Chromebooks, because it just integrates nice and smoothly with Google Classroom platform. So, as Mark said earlier, we have these one-time $100. And it's great. It's made our lives so much easier to get devices in the hands of our students. What it's also created, and Mark kind of hinted at, is that we have that issue of maintaining that precedent of one device per student. So that's really what this plan is meant to do. As you see here in the first 3 columns, 2020 through 23, you'll notice that the green column says federal dollars. Those were all ESSER dollars we used to purchase these devices. The issue is we now, by the end of 2023, are going to have a fleet of about 4,703 devices. What a lot of people don't understand about Chromebooks, they have about a 5-year lifespan. So we really need to start planning on how are we going to maintain this precedent we've set for our students and for our teachers to deliver that curriculum without having what we call these bubble years in our financial dollars. So what we talked about doing, and again, this is all going to be very fluid. As enrollment numbers change, we're going to have to reevaluate this. This is truly going to be a living plan, and it's more sort of a guideline as we move forward. But starting in 23-24, we're planning to purchase approximately 725 more devices. Do we need to at that point? No, because we have enough for every student. But it's not about the device need at that point in time. It's about the device need long term, because in 5 years, that device will still have a life available to it, whereas the device that it's going to be replacing will be replaced in about 2 years. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to balance that amount across the board. So every year we're sticking with a consistent amount of 725 Chromebooks, building up a fleet of replacements. So as devices get broken, we can't repair them, we have devices on hand to swap them out with students. And it allows us to bring our device count up and maintain it long term while having a consistent dollar amount that Mark in the finance office can work with to say, yes, we know we have to budget this amount of money every year. So that's really what this plan here is about. It's really about avoiding that bubble and spreading it out across multiple years to make it easier for us to budget. The next is the staff devices. We talked about purchasing the teacher devices last year. On schedule for this coming summer is all of our admin devices. We have a lot of admins that are still using desktops that even when they were purchased, they were technically used off lease from other companies and organizations. So we want to get them in the same position of teachers. We want them with laptops that allow for that flexibility of being mobile or being mobile. With that, again, device, you can stretch it out 5 to 7 years. It's not quite like a Chromebook where it's going to die after 5 years and no longer be updated. But what we want to do is, again, spread it out. We don't want to have these bubble years. So we maybe buy and replace some of our staff devices for teachers maybe a year ahead of time. And then right on schedule, replace the next third, and the year after, replace the final third. And what we're going to do using our ticketing system, which is why it's really important to use that, we can start to pull information from our ticketing system that says, yeah, we've worked on this person's laptop a lot. So we're going to use that data to decide which devices we're going to replace at time, not just arbitrarily say, oh, let's just replace the elementary teachers. Because you may have a teacher at the high school that has a device that's been failing for a couple of years and just barely getting by. Let's make sure we're strategically pinpointing those individuals that need replacement when it's needed, not just because we have the device. And the intent would be as well for that year 27-28 is when we would look at replacing the admin devices that we're looking at purchasing this year. And so again, it balances that dollar amount over multiple years. So the network replacement plan. This is the one that I hate to look at because it's such a large number, but it's such a huge necessity. We had these federal dollars that allow us to do switches, UPSs, and access points, even a firewall we're able to do at this point. That's a one-time purchase that typically doesn't happen outside of a bond. A lot of times school districts go out and bond dollars to replace this stuff. We were fortunate / unfortunate to have these ESSER dollars to be able to do this in 2021. However, just like anything that you purchase technology-wise, whether it's TV at home, or some of us who still have VCRs, if you have a VCR, if you're running it, you know it's starting to die. If you leave the network switch running 365 for 7 years, it's going to eventually have problems. And typically the lifespan for network switch is about 7 years. So the reason why I have the 27-28 timeline there, for yellow, is that's the, okay, we're getting the caution phase. We don't have to replace everything right now, but we're getting to that caution phase. So let's make sure we're planning ahead to allocate dollars for the replacement of these network switches. But we also have access points. They're about 7 years. You can push them to 10 years if need be. But the idea is, we know in 27-28 we need to start planning. We don't have to do all 3 of these things in 27-28. 28-29, maybe we shift something to that year so that we don't have all this money that we spend in 27-28. So in the 29 year, we move maybe the access points to be, to that more cautionary stage of the orange. We're starting to get really nervous about it. But really by that 20-30 year is when we really need to know that we have the dollars in, whether we have to go in 2030 because we have to shift dollars around, or we've done 3 different projects over the course of 3 years. By 2030, we've had these replaced, and now we're still moving forward, and we're not keeping things from dragging.
And Mark begins his final 7 years of his career. 27-28. Look forward to your replacement plans.
That's right.
I thought you were going to say, then I was in my last decade to get to 2030.
No. I'm going to let you start throwing her down. 2040.
You're awful now.
Oh yeah, you said your final decade. You're right.
Yeah.
I gave 3 years.
He's not bad.
Listen, our tech director has a VCR.
It's still important to just say but yeah, so this is kind of the plan for where we're at for the network replacement. So the continued planning, right? There's so many more things that we've talked about, and obviously we've talked about the security camera system several times throughout the night. A phone system replacement. Our phones are approximately 10 years old in the district. We have buttons that are failing, and we can't necessarily buy replacements for them. We've already been working off the cooperative bid to get pricing, and we've shared that with the Finance and Operations Department as we continue moving forward on that. And that does tie into security. It's important that if a teacher calls 911, that it's going to tell them to enter this building. That's kind of important. So that's part of that security process. We're planning right now for PA and classroom application systems. Your classroom application systems, roughly about 10 years old as well. And I just found out in a conversation with a representative from the ISD that our microphones that were purchased 10 years ago, when they break, they're no longer fixing them. The vendors are no longer fixing them. Manufacturers not fixing them. Oh, and by the way, they don't really have microphones that you can buy to work with existing amplifiers. So we're going to be looking at eBay to possibly keep some of this from us. We're going to figure that out. With that, continued growth for student device availability. We want to make sure we're continuing to grow those devices with that plan that we talked about earlier. And the smart board initiative, get more of these smart boards in here. We love seeing these kids getting interactive with them. We love seeing teachers delivering content in ways they probably never thought of before. And we're planning for a network wiring replacement. That'll probably some of these things will have to be part of the bond. But we've got a lot of old network switches in our closet and in our walls that need to be replaced. And as always, everything we're doing, we're constantly trying to scale that budget to try to prevent those issues. Pretty much all we have. Any questions?
I guess the question kind of goes to Mark with, the network replacement plan. Do you then say, okay, we're going to set aside $50,000 or $75,000 a year in a spot, and then in 7-8 years, and we need it, we go, yeah, we plan for it. You know what I mean? Or do we use that fund, those funds for whatever, and wait until we need this, and then go, okay, wave the wand and find it?
It's not a perfect answer, that's why Mike said it's a dynamic plan. So E-rate. E-rate is one of our funding sources that has been around for a long time. Problem is E-rate has kind of come and gone and focused on what they'll allow. And so obviously if we can hit those federal dollars where they come, we would tap those. The old way, yep, straight line. Put it in the budget. Either build up a fund balance in a building and site fund, or your 5, 10 in the purchase. But what we're always watching is, when do we get, if we get one-time dollars, is this the time to use a one-time dollar infusion for a project like this, and you move it up, accelerate it a couple years, instead of saying we replace it in year 10, we replace it in year 7, because E-rate in 2026 is going to allow for one of those types of elements. And they keep changing the rules. So we're in constant flux, watching and looking. It's not one, but yes, ultimately we need, as Mike said, to identify probably multiple funding sources, and then as you get closer to that yellow, orange, red, then make sure you're setting aside enough funds.
Well, and as mentioned earlier, I mean, districts talk about 5 and 10 year strategic plans, and you enter some of these large one-time purchases into bond programs, right? That is a normal part of district budgeting in many places. It's not here.
Right.
So we're continually basically taking the bond word off the table as a potential resource for some of these larger one-time purchases, because it's easier to incrementally replace devices. It's a lot harder to plan for a large one-time purchase when those systems begin to fail. You can't buy that switch in advance and just leave it in a closet for 4 years. It's kind of money budgeted incrementally. So it does force a little more creativity on our part, knowing that the one-time resource of a bond won't necessarily be here in a place like here.
The Chromebooks, let's say you have 100 Chromebooks and you take those and you refurbish them.
So really the issue with the Chromebook is it's all about what they call the auto-update policy. And it's really tied more to state standard assets. The UNICEF has and NWA. The Chromebook is supported for getting auto-updates up to a certain point that will then allow it to continue to be used for that testing. When the Chromebook gets out of date, you no longer test with it because the state testing site won't support that version. So that's really what the issue is really about state standards.
It's a unique issue. It's different than just a normal laptop, because when you buy a Chromebook, you already know the date that those updates are going to stop. And as soon as that date hits, you're no longer allowed to use that for testing.
And that can change either from Chromebook or the state, right?
That's actually true, yeah.
They can shift that.
They have, I think even during COVID, there were some models that were supposed to expire in 2021, and they actually extended the year that those were allowed to receive updates.
So what is the amount? It's not a hardware issue.
No,
No,
it's not. No, it's not fixing everything, no.
And it's really built-in economic. That's why Microsoft stays in business, because if they last forever, they would go out of business at some point. So it's an auto
Well, it'd be
renewal.
nice if you could refurbish and you own them and you sell them to another school district of lesser or whatever, and then you recoup that money, so that would be a nice way.
But kind of back to your question, Craig, on this dynamic plan, Mike and Steve and I talked, so using the Chromebooks, if we went back 10 years, our only option was a desktop. Even laptops are too costly for districts unless you had, strong bonding in your community. Then we've moved to a point where, it was laptops dropped down to the $600 range. The problem is, we're overbuying for that application with the laptops, and now we've got the Chromebook that's down to $200, $225. So it keeps changing, technology's evolving and changing and meeting the needs of the marketplace, and the price points have come down. And so it's not that we don't want to buy laptops for every student, it's we're overbuying for what the application is. Chromebooks fit it. 10 years from now, we won't be talking Chromebooks. Fill in the blank, we don't know what that is, and that's what we're talking about.
So with this Go Guardian for classroom management, I know students have their own laptops that they bring. How do they handle that? How are we handling that?
Yeah, so the nice thing about GoGuardian is it's actually tied to their Gmail account. So when they log into their device with their own personal account, and they go to the browser and log in and access Google Classroom or Drive, they have to log in with the school provided account. That also allows people to manage that device.
Oh, for that, oh, okay.
But might address the state testing with the personal laptop versus.
We don't necessarily mind students bringing their device in, but regardless of them bringing their own device, they still have to have a school issued device because we have to set up software on the back end that will work for them to do the MSAT test. So that's where the Chromebook being a cost-effective solution really comes into play. So even if a student brings their own device, you may still have a Chromebook sitting in that building ready for that student use.
Any other questions?
Thanks for having us.
Thank
you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the work.
Okay, brings us into the action item portion. First is our consent grouping. Approval of minutes of January 5th, 2020.
I moved that very,
Go right ahead.
save me a couple minutes, maybe.
Okay, just go right into it there.
I moved that we approve the minutes of January 5th.
Support. Okay, I have a motion and a support. Mrs. Novak?
Aye.
Mrs. LeBar?
Aye.
Mr. Lipka?
Aye.
Dr. Watson?
Aye.
Mr. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mrs. McKenna?
Aye.
Mrs. Putnam says aye. Motion carries. Okay, security camera bid.
You want the first reading board
That was part of the consent grouping. Thank
Set
you.
the minute, did I jump in on?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So I'll go right into security bid.
I'm noting this for the record. Madam President.
Check.
Can I do a motion?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Go
We're
for it.
really off. All right, I move that the hand wash security cameras and milestone servers, including installation in the amount of $368,868.86 with a district managed contingency for the project in the amount of $36,868 be approved as presented.
I'll support that.
Okay, I have a motion and a support. Any discussion on the motion?
Madam President, there's an adjustment to that, just so for the record, we have that CBTS, the company that we're buying the equipment that you read, Lisa, is coming from that company. That was an inadvertent.
CBTS.
Yes,
BTS, okay,
thank you.
Purchase.
Thank
hand
you.
wash security.
okay. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mrs. Novak?
Aye.
Mrs. LeBar?
Aye.
Mr. Lipka?
Aye.
Dr. Watson?
Aye.
Mr. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mrs. McKenna? Mrs. Putnam says aye. Motion carries. Okay, that concludes our action items. Board member communications.
I just want to say thank you to Roland Warner and Rich and Lisa and Andrea. The word that I kept coming up with is passionate. You see the passion, and when you're passionate about something, you're really good at it. So I really appreciate all the information you provided and seeing that part of their passion. And I would be remiss if we did not go back and say thank you to the food service for our wonderful meal they did in January.
Yes.
And I apologize, we had a lot going on that meeting, and we were probably too sleepy from being so full of the food, so we'll blame it on that. But again, thank you so much to the food service for providing us with that amazing meal.
I had the opportunity earlier this week to act as a judge at Murphy Elementary for the 5th grade spelling bee. And there were 18 very nervous kids that participated out of, I believe it's either 75 or 76 5th graders. And I was told that it was the first assembly. I know that we're talking about, everything getting back to normal, COVID. For some of us, COVID made a whole different kind of change for us that we'll never be able to go back to. But as far as for school, it was nice because I was told that it was the first assembly that they were actually able to have at the elementary school level. And I was so happy to see the sea of children sitting and encouraging their peers and celebrating these kids one letter at a time. And then it was, the pause, and then us judges were given a little green or red, like on a little popsicle stick, whether they got it right or they got it wrong. And those kids were staring at us. And then hearing the collective from all of the kids in the audience, it was so awesome. And I want to thank Mrs. Chenard from Murphy and the other judges, Elizabeth Gardner and Renee Nugent. We were able to do that, and Mrs. Curry was one of the people that were moderating it, but it was so fun. And again, another attempt at us getting back to normal. So, and Ellery Madela won, and she won by spelling the word squabbling. And we went 13 rounds, and these kids did just a phenomenal job, and I know they were nervous, but it was so great to see their happiness and just to see the excitement on their face, and I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to be there.
Craig, tell us why.
Don't get me started. I just want to say thank you to LSP doing the recognition awards kind of neat. It's, nowadays, new things, recognizing people for different things is a great idea. So, great job, keep it up.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the spelling bee. I'm going to be at Shipper next week, being a judge. I'm looking forward to it. It sounds like it's going to be very exciting. And I thanks Lisa for bringing up food services. I do apologize for not last meeting, but the food was delicious. We're always grateful for the appreciation that is shown to us during that dinner. Definitely thanking Roland Warner. What I really love is just a lot more leadership shown in our students driving their learning instead of top down, just screwing their head off, filling it with good stuff and sending them out to the world. It's really developing all their leadership skills. I mean, that's very, and the excitement that everyone has about it is encouraging. Love it. And you keep it up. And the technology plan to go along with that, really appreciate bringing that and how it's all tying together and how we can move forward. So, with that, I will hand it over to you, Superintendent Longer.
Thank you very, very much. Very quickly, again, echoing the Roland Warner piece, you mentioned the word leadership. The growth of leadership capacity for our kids is great, but it's also evidence tonight that why it's a great leader. Because we had 3 very dynamic presenters in their own right. We know it all starts. Why, right? Lisa, beginning it begins and ends with why, right? I know he's watching this on
Please watching this,
So, why I'm mostly
That's
serious.
correct. Absolutely correct.
But thanks for stepping in. Oh, God, Renee's a jerk.
Shout out to Renee.
And Beth, and your recognition recognition of the gals in transportation. My goodness, we have had the most challenging couple of years, this year in particular. And boy, those ladies have had to make some tough phone calls with canceled runs and truck driver shortages. And every time I walk in there, they are ready to rock and excited to be there. But when it snows, they don't leave until the last bus is in, right? Because they've got issues to deal with, and we'll get the text sometimes at 6 at night from Linda, last bus is in, we're safe. And it takes an army of people to run that department, and a lot of times it gets lost in the shuffle that those secretaries who are manning the phones and letting worried parents know that buses are on the way, or letting principals know that buses are going to be late in the morning, or they got a job, they got a real job. So that was great to hear about that. Guys, Steve and Mike, Mark and I have had this conversation for so many years. The thirst we've had for this type of support, direction, is long overdue. Just does my heart good to see it all finally come to fruition. We know it's been a tough transition. It hasn't been easy, but I do feel like we're finally getting our stride. And I look forward to what the fruit that's going to bear. So I really appreciate all you bring to the table, and it's a very important piece of our district plan. We're going to meet in subcommittees in the coming month and a half to discuss the preliminary bond numbers that we've received from Barton Mallow. Again, still with the final decision yet to be made about this board, whether this is the right plan moving forward for our district. And I look forward to a robust discussion at the individual committee level to share with you the numbers to see if this is something that we still think is good moving forward. So that's coming in a special meeting in March 16th to discuss publicly as a board where we're at with that. And then finally, just pleased to announce that you're all aware that the large-scale district-wide training for Alice on March 18th, which was originally scheduled as a student day of instruction, has now been replaced as professional development day. We're going to have some district staff and other ancillary support staff trained on March 11th in advance of that larger date. But as promised, a couple really important things on our security trajectory that we discussed at our community forum in December was the security camera. So thank you to the bid for your approval. Thank you to Mark and the technology team for doing some really challenging work in evaluating those proposals and the bids. Very excited to get that done, and for our staff and our students to work towards getting being Alice certified district. Two really big important steps on the road to improvements in safety and security.
Excellent.
With that, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a support. Mrs. Novak? Mrs. Novak? Mrs. LeVar?
Aye.
Mr. Luca?
Aye.
Dr. Watson? Mr. Mango?
Aye.
Mrs. McKenna? Aye. Mrs. Putnam says aye. Motion carries.